Acts chapter 23, New King James Version. Now, Acts 22 ended where Paul had gone to Jerusalem and bad things had happened. The Roman commander got there just in time before the Jews killed him and rescued Paul. Paul lets the Roman commander know that he is actually a Roman citizen, and then the Roman commander gets a little afraid, and he says, well, we need to call in these Jews and find out why they hate you so much or what they are accusing you of. And so at the very end of chapter 22, let's look at it. It says, the next day, because he wanted to know for certain why he was accused by the Jews. So the Roman commander wanted to know why for certain Paul was accused by the Jews. So the Roman commander released Paul from his bonds and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear. Now, originally I thought that meant that they had to come appear before the Roman council, but I think it actually seems that, and it says, and brought Paul down and set him before them. So it seems that the Roman commander went to the Jewish council in Jerusalem. He brought Paul to the Jewish council. So as Paul stands before the Jewish council, as the Roman commander had brought him, verse 1, then Paul, looking earnestly at the council, said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. And the high priest Ananias commanded those who stood by him to strike him on the mouth. Now, I don't know. It seems like he's striking him for things that he had already said. I mean, it doesn't seem like he's striking him because he says, I lived in good conscience before God until this day. And I don't know exactly what Paul's saying. Is Paul saying, I don't have a good conscience now? Or he's saying that I have always had a good conscience. So until this day could mean either one of those. He could be saying, I have always lived in good conscience. I've always done what I have felt convicted to do, and doing my best to be the best person that I can be all my life up until this day, and then not ending on this day, but every day up until now, I've always had a good conscience. And I guess it could mean I've had a good conscience until now, and now I don't have a good conscience, but I don't think that makes sense. So I think Paul's saying, I've always done everything with a good conscience. I've always done it with good intentions. And I guess the high priest was so offended that Paul's saying that he's done everything he's ever done with a good conscience. If he thinks that Paul's going around saying that the Jewish way of life and religion is no longer valid, and he says, I've had a good conscience in saying these things, then I can see how that would be offensive to the high priest. So they strike Paul on the mouth. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall, for you sit to judge me according to the law. And do you command me to be struck contrary to the law? And those who stood by said, Do you revile God's high priest? And Paul said, I did not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, You shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. Now this throws me off a little bit, because Paul recognizes that this person, whoever he is, had authority over him. He was sitting in judgment. Paul even says, For you sit to judge me according to the law. He must know that he's somebody of authority if he's judging him according to the law. But yet Paul says, I didn't know he was a high priest, or else I wouldn't have said those things. So part of this, it doesn't really make sense to me. I would like Paul to handle himself a little differently. I would like Paul to accept God's plan no matter what, and not be argumentative or defensive in his position, or especially, not attacking his attackers verbally. But Paul had a pretty aggressive personality. At times, he was highly tactful. He was very gracious and tactful in the way he spoke. But at times like this, he took things a little more personal, and it seems, made some personal arguments or defenses, which that's just human. Everybody's different. People handle things differently, and Paul came to Jerusalem knowing that he was about to be persecuted and possibly killed for his faith, and he was prepared for that. But now he's kind of lashing out or striking back at the high priest. And those who stood by said, "Do you revile the high priest?" He said, "I didn't know he was the high priest, because you're not supposed to speak evil of the ruler of your people." But when Paul perceived that one part were Sadducees and the other Pharisees, he cried out in the council, which means he just spoke loudly for everybody to hear. "Men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged." So he kind of changes the subject. I don't know, it feels like he's changing the subject. Paul is trying to pit the council against itself, the Sadducees against the Pharisees on the Jewish council. And it works. Because he's saying, I'm a Pharisee and I'm being judged concerning my hope of resurrection. And when he had said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and Sadducees, and the assembly was divided. For Sadducees say there is no resurrection and no angel or spirit, but the Pharisees confess both. So I guess the Sadducees thought that life only consisted of what you could see, feel, and touch now on this earth and in this fleshly body. That everything that mattered is what happened between the time that you were born and die on earth. But the Pharisees believed in life after death, the resurrection, which included a spiritual body. Now, today people talk about the resurrection of physical body, and I don't believe in that at all. The only evidence I see that supports that is that Jesus himself was resurrected in his physical body, but yet he was changed to a spiritual body when he ascended into heaven. And I believe that was like a special occasion. And there are examples of people who were resurrected from the dead, but they continued on in their physical body until they died again, like Lazarus, and there were, several others. But that was a resurrection unto death, which means you were going to die again. The resurrection to life is one where you never die again, and the spirit never dies. So I believe in the resurrection of the spirit, where there will never be any more death. That's what I'm looking forward to for myself. So, verse 9, then there arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisees party arose and protested, saying, "We find no evil in this man, but if a spirit or angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." So these scribes of the Pharisees are aligning themselves really with themselves. They find out Paul is a Pharisee, and they say, well, he's a Pharisee, he's one of us, so we don't find any fault in him. So they completely forgot about the fact that they were accusing Paul of really destroying the whole Jewish system, coming up with a new world religion where the Jewish religion and nation was no longer God's special people. But they completely forget about that and focus on the fact that they've got bigger fish to fry between the Pharisees and Sadducees instead of Paul. And even in their argument, in their support of Paul, they want to take a jab at the Sadducees and say, if a spirit or angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God. So Paul was claiming that an angel or a spirit appeared before him on the road to Damascus, made him go blind before he went and was converted in Damascus. Now, when there arose a great dissension, the commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded the soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks. So it seems like the Roman commander was kind of watching from the outside. It didn't seem like he was, holding close attention or just, having him handcuffed and bound and keeping him under close surveillance. It seems like he let him go freely into the Jewish council to be judged, and he watched from a distance, from outside. And they were probably even speaking a different language that the Roman commander might not even understand. They were probably speaking Hebrew, and the Roman commander probably spoke Greek or something, I don't know. But they see that there's a lot of riotous actions and loud screaming. It doesn't seem like a peaceful scene at all. So the Roman commander goes in and saves Paul from being destroyed. But the following night the Lord stood by Paul and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome." Now this could be a literal event where the Lord actually stood in presence, some bodily presence beside Paul, and verbally announced these words: "Be of good cheer, you testified in Jerusalem, now you'll testify in Rome." I see the possibility that this is just a way to express the feeling and understanding that Paul had, that he understood that God was with him, that God was sovereign, and maybe even the Roman commander said, "I can see you're not going to be judged fairly by the Jews, so I'm going to take you to Rome." And then Paul understood that that was going to be God's will, so he says, "I need to cheer up. This is just God's plan for me. Now I'm going to go to Rome." So either way is fine with me. I couldn't prove one way or the other, but I think there's at least those possibilities. "And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. They came to the chief priest and the elders and said, 'We have bound ourselves under a great oath, that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul.'" And it just made me think, up here in verse 12, it says we will neither eat nor drink. And then verse 14, it says we will eat nothing till we have killed Paul. So that's just an example of how one part of a sentence can give a little bit more detail than another. But I think the truth is they said that they would neither eat nor drink. And then when they went to the elders, we only have the reflection that they said they wouldn't eat. But I believe it was both. Just less detail in one part than the other. "Now you therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him. But we are ready to kill him before he comes near." So there's 40 people intent on killing Paul, and they tell the Jewish elders to ask the Roman commander to bring Paul back down on the following day and say that they have a few more things they need to ask him. And they were to come across as civil and respectful, that they were just had a legitimate purpose for talking to Paul. When, the day before, they got so out of hand that the Roman commander had to rush in and prevent Paul from being ripped apart. So when Paul's sister's son, that's Paul's nephew. So when Paul's nephew heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called, so that means the Romans allowed Paul to see visitors. Visitors were allowed to get into the Roman barracks to see Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him." So now a centurion who is a military leader of 100 soldiers is listening to Paul and even doing what Paul asks him to do. So this is a decent place for Paul to be. He's actually being protected by the Romans, and the Romans are giving him respect and courtesy. But Paul didn't want to just tell the centurion himself what the plot was. He wanted to keep it a secret just between him and the commander. Now, I looked at some other stuff that said the commander was probably a ruler of up to 1,000 men, so he probably had 10 centurions that reported to him. So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, so the centurion took the nephew to the commander and said, Paul, the prisoner, called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. So we know that the nephew was young. Don't know how young. He has something to say to you. Then the commander took him by the hand. And I guess the fact that he calls him a young man makes me think that he's a child or a teenager. Because I think if he was 20 years old or older, he would just be called a man. That's just the way I think it may not be correct. The commander took the young man, nephew, by the hand, went aside and asked privately, what is it that you have to tell me? So here the commander is also paying respects to Paul and giving him courtesy by listening to the nephew. He could have told him to get away, I don't care what you have to say. But he's respectful of Paul's situation. And probably mostly because Paul said he was a Roman citizen, so they were obligated to treat Roman citizens with respect. And he said, the Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you. So the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, tell no one that you have revealed these things to me. So he doesn't want to let his plan get out. He doesn't want anyone to know, even the centurions. He doesn't want anyone to know that he knows about this Jewish plot to kill Paul. And he called for 2 centurions, that's 200 people, saying, bring 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, and 200 spearmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. Okay, to Caesarea. I think they're in Jerusalem. They're in the barracks at Jerusalem, the Roman barracks. And Paul is under, I can't think of the word I'm trying to think of. Whatever, he's under, I want to say it's not really arrest, he's just under the jurisdiction or custody. I think that's what I'm looking for. He's under the custody of a Roman military leader. Not a politician. He's going to a politician. But he's under custody of a Roman leader, military leader. And they're going to go to Caesarea. And I looked this up earlier and debated with myself because I know there are at least 3 Caesareas, but the Caesarea where Felix was in Samaria. So this is the Caesarea that's not far from Jerusalem, in Samaria, on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And it says the 3rd hour of the night. I think that would mean around 9 p.m. But they didn't really count time like that. It would really be, within the first, maybe about 3 hours after the sunset. Whatever time the sun set, I don't know. But about 3 hours after the sun went down. So they're going at night under the cover of darkness to Caesarea with possibly 470 soldiers to protect him from the 40 that are known to have a plot to kill Paul. So I think they're Paul is well guarded by the Romans. And provide mounts to set Paul on. So Paul wasn't even walking, he was on a horse. and bring him safely to Felix the governor. So now he's going to a politician, someone who had authority to decide what to do with Paul. He wrote a letter in the following manner: Claudius Lysias, that's the Roman governor, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. This man was seized by the Jews and was about to be killed by them. Coming with the troops, I rescued him. Having learned that he was a Roman, well, he didn't rescue him because he learned he was a Roman. He was about to beat him, and that's when he found out he was a Roman. But Claudius Lysias kind of leaves that part out conveniently. He didn't say, well, I was about to beat him, but he said he was a Roman. He said, I rescued him with the troops because I learned he was a Roman. So I rescued a Roman from the Jews. It's not exactly what happened. And when I wanted to know the reason they accused him, I brought him before their council. You see, he also left out the part that when he wanted to know the reason they accused him, he was going to beat him to find out why they were accusing him. But then he found out he was a Roman. But he left that part out. But I found out that he was accused concerning questions of their law, the Jewish law, but had nothing charged against him deserving of death or chains by Roman law. And when it was told me that the Jews lay in wait for the man, I sent him immediately to you, and also commanded his accusers to state before you the charges against him. So, he protected Paul, sent him to Felix, who had authority, I guess political authority, to decide what to do with Paul. And the Roman commander, I guess, told the Jewish council that they had sent Paul to Felix in Caesarea. And then he says farewell in the letter. Then the soldiers, as they were commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. Then I don't know if that's a location or a person. And I'm afraid to pause it because it's been messing up my videos. The next day, they left the horsemen to go on with him and returned to the barracks. So the next day, I believe, they left the 70 horsemen with Paul to protect him, and the 400 soldiers, the 200 soldiers and the 200 spearmen, went back to the Roman barracks. And if this Roman commander, Claudius, what was his name? Lysias, if he only has 10 centurions, he sent 4, maybe 5 centurions, maybe half of his entire army that was under his control, he sent to protect Paul. Because it was 200 soldiers and 200 spearmen and 70 horsemen or whatever. When they had come to Caesarea and had delivered the letter to the governor, they also presented Paul to him. And when the governor had read it, he asked what province he was from. And when he understood that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will hear you when your accusers also have come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. So Herod was the Jewish king. So he was kept in a Jewish, fortress or something. What does this note say? Yeah, nothing. In Caesarea until the Jews and the Jewish council could come to Caesarea. So we'll have to wait till Acts 24 to find out what's said in Caesarea when the Jews arrived to accuse Paul. Okay, well, I think that will complete Acts 23. Would like to see your comments down below. Please subscribe and turn on notifications so we can study together.